Aldous Huxley opens the doors of perception. Aldous Leonard Huxley, 26th of July 1894 to the 22nd of November 1963, was an English writer. He spent the latter part of his life in the United States with his wife, living in Los Angeles from 1937 until his death in 1963. Best known for his novels and wide-ranging output of essays, he also published short stories, poetry, travel writing, film stories, and scripts. Huxley was a pacifist and was also interested in spiritual subjects such as parapsychology and philosophical mysticism. He was also well known for taking hallucinogens. At the time, they were being researched to help in establishing their properties. The Doors of Perception is the account of Aldous Huxley's experience with the hallucinogenic drug mescalin. Although his experience was drug-induced, it provides a uniquely well-written account of what opening the door to perception means. Indeed, it was on that spring morning in 1953 that Aldous came to a complete understanding of exactly what William Blake had meant when he said, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite." Huxley wrote his account directly after the event from a tape recording made at the time, thus ensuring nothing he said was lost. It is worth adding that Huxley's sight was badly impaired and he eventually lost his sight in his right eye. Wikipedia. It was and is widely believed that Huxley was nearly blind, despite the partial recovery that had enabled him to study at Oxford. Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception. I swallowed 4/10 of a gram of mescalin dissolved in half a glass of water. It was in 1886 that the German pharmacologist Louis Lewin published the first systematic study of the cactus, to which his own name was subsequently given. And Halonium lewini was new to science. To primitive religion and the Indians of Mexico and the American Southwest, it was a friend of immemorially long standing. Indeed, it was much more than a friend. In the words of one of the early Spanish visitors to the New World, they eat a root which they call peyote and which they venerate as though it were a deity. Why they should have venerated it as a deity became apparent when such eminent psychologists as Jentsch, Havelock Ellis and Weir Mitchell began their experiments with mescalin, the active principle of peyote. True, they stopped short at a point well this side of idolatry, but all concurred in assigning to mescalin a position among drugs of unique distinction. Administered in suitable doses, it changes the quality of consciousness more profoundly, and yet is less toxic than any other substance in the pharmacologist's repertory. mescalin research has been going on sporadically ever since the days of Lewin and Havelock Ellis. Chemists have not merely isolated the alkaloid, they have learned how to synthesize it, so that the supply no longer depends on the sparse and intermittent crop of a desert cactus. By a series of, for me, extremely fortunate circumstances, I found myself in the spring of 1953 squarely athwart that research trail. One of the sleuths, Dr. Humphrey Osmond, had come on business to California. In spite of 70 years of mescalin research, the psychological material at his disposal was still absurdly inadequate, and he was anxious to add to it. I was on the spot, and willing, indeed eager, to be a guinea pig. Thus it came about, one bright May morning, I swallowed 0.4 of a gram of mescalin, dissolved in half a glass of water, and sat down to wait for the results. From what I had read of the mescalin experience, I was convinced in advance that the drug would admit me, at least for a few hours, into the kind of inner world described by Blake and A.E., the Irish poet and painter. But what I had expected did not happen. I had expected to lie with my eyes shut, looking at visions of many-coloured geometries, of animated architectures rich with gems and fabulously lovely, of landscapes with heroic figures, of symbolic dramas trembling perpetually on the verge of the ultimate revelation. But I had not reckoned, it was evident, with the idiosyncrasies of my mental makeup, the facts of my temperament, training, and habits. The change which actually took place in that world was in no sense revolutionary. Half an hour after swallowing the drug, I became aware of a slow dance of golden lights. A little later there were sumptuous red surfaces, swelling and expanding from bright nodes of energy that vibrated with a continuously changing patterned life. At another time, the closing of my eyes revealed a complex of grey structures, within which pale bluish spheres kept emerging into intense solidity, and having emerged, would slide noiselessly upwards out of sight. But at no time were there faces or forms of men or animals. I saw no landscapes, no enormous spaces, no magical growth and metamorphosis of buildings, nothing remotely like a drama or a parable. The other world to which mescalin admitted me was not the world of visions. It existed out there in what I could see with my open eyes. The great change was in the realm of objective fact. What had happened to my subjective universe was relatively unimportant. I took my pill at 11. An hour and a half later, I was sitting in my study, looking intently at a small glass vase. The vase contained only 3 flowers: a full-blown Belle of Portugal rose, shell pink, with a hint at every petal's base of a hotter, flamier hue, a large magenta and cream-coloured carnation, and pale purple at the end of its broken stalk, the bold, heraldic blossom of an iris. Fortuitous and provisional, the little nosegay broke all the rules of traditional good taste. At breakfast that morning, I had been struck by the lively dissonance of its colours, but that was no longer the point. I was not looking now at an unusual flower arrangement. I was seeing what Adam had seen on the morning of his creation, the miracle, moment by moment, of naked existence. Is it agreeable? Somebody asked. Neither agreeable nor disagreeable, I answered. It just is. Isnichkeit. Wasn't that the word Meister Eckhart liked to use? Isness. The being of Platonic philosophy. Except that Plato could never, poor fellow, have seen a bunch of flowers shining with their own inner light and all but quivering under the pressure of the significance with which they were charged. Could never have perceived that what rose and iris and carnation so intensely signified was nothing more and nothing less than what they were. A transience that was yet eternal life, a perpetual perishing that was at the same time pure being, a bundle of minute, unique particulars, in which by some unspeakable and yet self-evident paradox was to be seen the divine source of all existence. I continued to look at the flowers, and in their living light I seemed to detect a repeated flow from beauty to heightened beauty, from deeper to ever deeper meaning. Words like grace and transfiguration came to my mind, and this, of course, was what, among other things, they stood for. My eyes travelled from the rose to the carnation, and from that feathery incandescence to the smooth scrolls of sentient amethyst, which were the iris, the beatific vision, Sat, Chit, Ananda, being, awareness, bliss. For the first time I understood, not on the verbal level, not by inchoate hints or at a distance, but precisely and completely what those prodigious syllables referred to. The books, for example, with which my study walls were lined, like the flowers, they glowed when I looked at them with brighter colours, a profounder significance. Red books like rubies, emerald books, books bound in white jade, books of agate, of aquamarine, of yellow topaz. Lapis lazuli books whose colour was so intense, so intrinsically meaningful, that they seemed to be on the point of leaving the shelves to thrust themselves more insistently on my attention. What about spatial relationships? The investigator inquired as I was looking at the books. It was difficult to answer. True, the perspective looked rather odd, and the walls of the room no longer seemed to meet in right angles. But these were not the really important facts. The really important facts were that spatial relationships had ceased to matter very much, and that my mind was perceiving the world in terms of other than spatial categories. At ordinary times, the eye concerns itself with such problems as where, how far, how situated in relation to what. In the mescalin experience, the implied questions to which the eye responds are of another order. Place and distance cease to be of much interest. The mind does its perceiving in terms of intensity of existence, profundity of significance, relationships within a pattern. I saw the books, but was not at all concerned with their positions in space. What I noticed, what impressed itself upon my mind, was the fact that all of them glowed with living light, and that in some the glory was more manifest than in others. In this context, position and the 3 dimensions were beside the point. Not, of course, that the category of space had been abolished. When I got up and walked about, I could do so quite normally, without misjudging the whereabouts of objects. Space was still there, but it had lost its predominance. The mind was primarily concerned not with measures and locations, but with being and meaning. And along with indifference to space, there went an even more complete indifference to time. There seems to be plenty of it, was all I could answer when the investigator asked me to say what I felt about time.